Although it has abundant natural resources, Africa remains the world's poorest and least developed continent, other than Antarctica, the result of a variety of causes that may include corrupt governments that have often committed serious human rights violations, failed central planning, high levels of illiteracy, low self-esteem, lack of access to foreign capital, legacies of colonialism, the slave trade, and the Cold War, and frequent tribal and military conflict, ranging from guerrilla warfare to genocide. Its total nominal GDP remains behind that of the United States, China, Japan, Germany, the United Kingdom, India and France. According to the United Nations Human Development Report in 2003, the bottom 24 ranked nations, 151st to 175th, were all African. Poverty, illiteracy, malnutrition and inadequate water supply and sanitation, as well as poor health, affect a large proportion of the people who reside in the African continent. In August 2008, the World Bank announced revised global poverty estimates based on a new international poverty line of $1.25 per day, versus the previous measure of $1.00. 81% of the sub-Saharan African population was living on less than $2.50 PPP per day in 2005, compared with 86% for India. Sub-Saharan Africa is the least successful region of the world in reducing poverty. $1.25 per day, some 50% of the population living in poverty in 1981. 200 million people, a figure that rose to 58% in 1996 before dropping to 50% in 2005. 380 million people. The average poor person in sub-Saharan Africa is estimated to live on only 70 cents per day, and was poorer in 2003 than in 1973, indicating increasing poverty in some areas. Some of it is attributed to unsuccessful economic liberalization programs spearheaded by foreign companies and governments. But other studies have cited bad domestic government policies more than external factors. Africa is now at risk of being in debt once again, particularly in sub-Saharan African countries. The last debt crisis in 2005 was resolved with help from the Heavily Indebted Poor Countries Scheme, HIPC. The HIPC resulted in some positive and negative effects on the economy in Africa. About 10 years after the 2005 debt crisis in sub-Saharan Africa was resolved, Zambia fell back into debt. A small reason was due to the fall in copper prices in 2011. But the bigger reason was that a large amount of the money Zambia borrowed was wasted or pocketed by the elite. From 1995 to 2005, Africa's rate of economic growth increased, averaging 5% in 2005. Some countries experienced still higher growth rates, notably Angola, Sudan and Equatorial Guinea, all of which had recently begun extracting their petroleum reserves or had expanded their oil extraction capacity. Quote, in a recently published analysis based on World Values Survey data, the Austrian political scientist Arno Tausch maintained that several African countries, most notably Ghana, perform quite well on scales of mass support for democracy and the market economy. Tausch's global value comparison based on the World Values Survey derived the following factor. Analytical scales. 1. The nonviolent and law-abiding society. 2. Democracy movement. 3. Climate of personal nonviolence. 4. Trust in institutions. 5. Happiness. Good health. 6. No redistributive religious fundamentalism. 7. Accepting the market. 8. Feminism. 9. Involvement in politics. 10. Optimism and engagement. 11. No welfare mentality. acceptancy of the Calvinist work ethics. The spread in the performance of African countries with complete data, Tausch concluded, is really amazing. While one should be especially hopeful about the development of future democracy and the market economy in Ghana, the article suggests pessimistic tendencies for Egypt and Algeria, and especially for Africa's leading economy, South Africa. High human inequality, as measured by the UNDP's Human Development Report, Index of Human Inequality, further impairs the development of human security. Tausch also maintains that the certain recent optimism, corresponding to economic and human rights data, emerging from Africa, is reflected in the development of a civil society. The continent is believed to hold 90% of the world's cobalt, 90% of its platinum, 50% of its gold, 98% of its chromium, 70% of its tantalite, 64% of its manganese and one-third of its uranium. The Democratic Republic of the Congo, DRC, has 70% of the world's coltan, a mineral used in the production of tantalum capacitors for electronic devices such as cell phones. The DRC also has more than 30% of the world's diamond reserves. Guinea is the world's largest exporter of bauxite. As the growth in Africa has been driven mainly by services and not manufacturing or agriculture, it has been growth without jobs and without reduction in poverty levels. In fact, the food security crisis of 2008, which took place on the heels of the global financial crisis, pushed 100 million people into food insecurity. In recent years, the People's Republic of China has built increasingly stronger ties with African nations and is Africa's largest trading partner. In 2007, Chinese companies invested a total of $1 billion in Africa. A Harvard University study led by Professor Calstus Jungma showed that Africa could feed itself by making the transition from importer to self-sufficiency. African agriculture is at the crossroads. We have come to the end of a century of policies that favored Africa's export of raw materials and importation of food. Africa is starting to focus on agricultural innovation as its new engine for regional trade and prosperity. Quote,